role do HBCUs play in promoting social justice, racial equality, and activism?
That's a super fascinating question, right? Because historically, it's been kind of more fraught answer than you might imagine,
Mm.
right? We might look at these institutions as being sort of the bastions for um, agitation, for progressive sentiments, and creating a critical mass of students to be able to go out into the world and change the world, right? But the reality, historically speaking, was sometimes a little bit different
Mm.
because the institutions, they're just trying to exist. They're trying to be able to, and in many instances, to exist in the South, where there are whole other communities that are a part of the cities where these institutions are that don't particularly feel like they want to see that kind of change.
Mm.
So historically speaking, it was always a fine line to try and walk. How do you help students feel affirmed? How do you help them feel valued? How do you help them feel like they have a history worth fighting for, and that their existence is something that is worth um, recognizing and allowing space for in the communities that they exist in and decide to go out into? But by the same token, you have the specter of respectability. We have to create students who are going to be role models and whatnot, and role models don't go out there and agitate
Mm.
or what have you.
Mhm.
So it's a fine line to sort of try and walk. You want to inform people, but you also do you want to inform them to the degree that they become, you know, um, agitators, radicals, so on and so forth. And I think that the successes of HBCUs have been quite marked. And I keep coming back to my experiences at Morehouse because I mean that is my that's where I was born again. One imagines, but
Right.
I don't know whether you know this or not, or it's kind of a not well kept. It's not a secret or anything like that. But Martin Luther King went to Morehouse,
Mm.
and so that's a big part also of what the institution now trades on. We've got King's Chapel right there in the middle of campus, and that's a legacy that the school really tries to push.
Mhm.
Um, so we recognize the fact that we do have alumni from these institutions that have gone on to be precisely the kind of radical change makers that push the needle, help bend the moral arc of the universe, as it were. And you have not only just actual activists, but you have people who are artists and who write into existence narratives that fundamentally change the way that establishments look at Black folks overall, right? I mean, we see connections to Howard for folks like Toni Morris and so on and so forth, right? So it's a big deal for these institutions to um, help serve as incubators for people who are going to effectuate real change and to create space for Black folks to exist in the broader American society. Now, in the contemporary moment, do we see that same kind of commitment towards uh, incubating change makers? And I think so.
Mm.
I think so. On certain campuses, you do see people who are keyed in. You do see people who are aware of situations and who are activist minded and so on and so forth. That do push and push um, that push back against systems of white supremacy where and however they exist. So we
Mhm.
definitely see that. Um, do the institutions actively advocate for that? Do they actually tell people to go out into the community and go be change makers? I mean, some people might say it's nice. It would be nice if they would, but then other people recognize again, you know, other people
Struggling
might
to
control it.
survive.
Exactly, exactly. So, it's always a complicated balancing act, I think.
I see. So, considering that Martin Luther King went to Morehouse, was Morehouse pretty heavily involved in the civil rights movement or anything like that?
Well, funny you should ask because not as much as you might think.
Hmm.
You have again change makers who do come about here, but how much does popular discourse remember Atlanta itself as being a seabed for change?
Hmm.
Morehouse is right in the middle of Atlanta, and yet and still, do we see? evidence of things like, and I mean, I'm not discounting anything that may have occurred there or anything like that. And I'm not a specialist in this particular aspect of history. But I mean, when we hear about changes, we hear about them in Montgomery or Selma or, other places as well. Not so much in the spaces where you have like Tuskegee or Morehouse or Spelman or so on and so forth, right? So it's interesting to consider. And I think the institution recognized that King was doing something worth recognizing. By that point, of course, he had graduated. But it's also a matter of, do we come out and full throatedly support this? I mean, because when King was making a lot of his agitations, not even other black pastors could get online with everything that he was trying to accomplish.
Right.
So we recognize that too. So I think the institution, of course, is proud of King now, and I think probably was proud of him to an extent at that point as well. But again, was Morehouse pushing people out the door and saying, "Go
Go.
change the world"? I'm
Right.
not sure. I don't think so, though.
I mean, that's one of those things now. I've seen some posts online that really they stand out in my brain. And one of them was saying that a lot of you believe that you would have been on the side of Martin Luther King in the middle of the civil rights movement, and in truth, most of you wouldn't. Because there was insane amounts of resistance, and what's even crazy is there was actually even a decent amount of resistance from other black folks that wanted
Yeah,
him not to make as many waves as he was. It's a really unpopular opinion to be the person that wants to change things, and a lot of times those people end up dying because it's extremely unpopular, and people tend to deal with unpopular people in certain ways. And so in history now and in hindsight, we tend to venerate those individuals and say, oh, this was the amazing genius, so poignant and so intelligent and so on and so forth. But it's always in hindsight, because in the moment there's still a fear. You, yeah, it's just there where it's like I would never advocate for people to do what they're doing, and it's like, I mean, I hear it, but then the change won't happen otherwise. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
but I can understand like kind of the delicate situation, because I would imagine I don't for a second believe that the vast majority of funding for HBCUs is coming strictly from black people. So then I would imagine uh, agitation can truly end your existence if certain people feel unmotivated to continue to support.